Hello, hello. Hey, remember back in March, we were doing March of the Mammoth, and I decided I would embark upon Don Quixote by Michael de Cervantes. Um, March was an interesting month for me, as you probably know from other videos on this channel. I read the first part one of the ingenious gentleman Don Quixote of La Mancha. I read the first part, right about to that little red marker there, and I figured, and I got to that about the end of March, and then I stopped and went, okay, I'm just gonna stop and I'm gonna think about that part because where my brain's at. And what I've decided I'm going to do is I'm just going to focus on one little conversation in this first part of the book. So Don Quixote, Michael de Cervantes, a soldier, tax collector, while he was in prison, got the idea for Don Quixote, which is this story of a kind of a minor a member of kind of minor nobility in Spain, a Hidalgo, who reads so much chivalric stories, stays up late reading it, so lack of sleep, that it dries up his brain, and he goes crazy. He suddenly believes that all these stories are actually true and decides to become a knight himself and go on adventures. And after his first kind of adventure, he picks up Sancho Panza, promising him, and he's going to get to rule his own island, Insula. That he will get his thing. And Sancho Panza is very kind of a simple guy. He actually sort of Don Quixote in some ways kind of convinces him, despite him very much seeing that these windmills aren't giants, that maybe there's a point here, and also just sort of kind of a greed thing. Sancho Panza is a very earthy character. He's greedy for food. He's greedy for to get wealth. He wants to get wealth, and he thinks like, I'm going to go along in this, and he's been promised great. He'll get to govern. He'll get to have great riches instead of being kind of just a humble peasant in Don Quixote's village. His niece and housekeeper and the local priest and barber are quite kind of horrified by Don Quixote's kind of having gone mad. They blame these books of chivalry, and indeed they go through them. The priest seems to know a lot about these books. He seems to have studied all of them carefully. And as they're deciding which ones to burn, he kind of does a little recitation on, we'll save this one, but that one can go in the fire and stuff like that. Cervantes' own book, actually, one of his own books gets saved from the fire, which, is kind of a funny thing right there. And there are many misadventures. There's many interwoven other tales in this. Cervantes is making fun of chivalric romances. Chivalric romances were a very old tradition by Quixote's time. This is like they go back like a couple of hundred years. Prose and verse narratives of fantastical stories with knights going off on quests. A lot of times there are, romances with ladies. There's also just kind of romance in the more kind of fantastical, marvelous adventure, that sense of a romance as well. But by the time Cervantes was actually writing Don Quixote, this was pretty out of fashion. It had been criticized by kind of clerical, the priestly caste of people as like, these are frivolous stories that are just, distracting people from, you should be focusing on more kind of serious stories. And indeed, just with the fashions of the time, there was a lot of people who just secular readers were also having that kind of starting to have that kind of reaction to it, of like, they're lies, they're fantastical, they're not realistic. And Cervantes is both, as the best kind of someone who will satirize something. Also, you can tell that he really loves these stories, because he basically makes his own kind of interwoven, all these different stories, examples of chivalric stuff, makes fun of the genre, but obviously knows it very deeply as a lot of the priests who would condemn it in this book, but also seem to know a lot about it. And so, what I want to focus on is just this one little bit, because I am a neophyte. This is my first time reading Don Quixote. This is something that, it's like Shakespeare. There's a lot of people, a lot of very smart people who've gone through these books and plucked out stuff and have a lot more complex thoughts. But I want to just kind of focus on one little thing, which comes kind of near the end of part one, where Don Quixote is let out of the cage that he's been imprisoned in, told he's been enchanted. There's a theme that people kind of make up stories to fool him into doing stuff that they want, thus compounding all of his other kind of delusions of giant windmills. There's a wizard that apparently swept in and bricked up his library, when actually it was the priest and the barber and the housekeeper and his niece who did all that when they were burning his books. They say, "Oh no, a wizard came in and did it all." So it's like, they're adding fuel to the fire that way. Poor Don Quixote gets just beaten to hell. Him and Sancho Paz just are continually getting whacked and beaten, and it's very kind of slapstick funny in that sense. But we also get things where, like, Don Quixote gets let out of his cage, and he has a little bit of a talk with a canon. This is a priest who is centered around the cathedral in, I think it's Toledo, where but they meet him on the road, and he's curious about Don Quixote, because he's this guy who's like, he displayed a very fine intelligence when he spoke and responded to questions. His feet slipping from the stirrups, as has been said many times before, only when the subject was chivalry. So it's like, you're an intelligent guy, but when you get him onto the subject of chivalry, he's just like, suddenly he's super delusional. And the canon, who, like a lot of the other kind of priestly characters in this thing, says like, all these romantic chivalry books, these books of chivalric, fantastical tales are terrible, but also is very into them at the same time. Because he confesses that he actually tried to write a book of chivalric romance, but soon found that, well, the really good ones that the public doesn't like, and the ones that are terrible are the ones that that are like, it's a kind of a complaint of authors all over the world. It's like, oh, the really good stuff just doesn't get appreciated by the audiences. But he says, for myself, I can say that when I read them, chivalric romances, as long as I do not set my mind to thinking that they are all frivolous lies, I do derive some pleasure from them. But when I realize what they actually are, I throw them, even the best of them, against the wall, and would even toss them in the fire if one were near, and think they richly deserve the punishment for being deceptive and false and far beyond the limits of common sense, like the founders of new sects and new ways of life. So he kind of says, he's trying to argue, Don Quixote away from this thing. It's like, you seem to be thinking, it seems to me, Senor, Don Quixote says, that the intention of your Grace's discourse has been to persuade me that there are no knights errant in the world, and that all the books of chivalry are false, untrue, harmful, and of no value to the nation, and that I have done wrong to read them, and worse to believe them, and worse yet to imitate them, by setting myself to the task of following the extremely difficult profession of knight-errantry which they teach, and you deny that there ever was an Amadeuses in the world, whether of Gaul or Greece, or any of the other knights that fill the writings. And, the canon agrees, Amadeus being one of the great kind of examples of a chivalric knight in this sort of thing. And and Don Quixote is very much like, how can they possibly be a lie, being so because they so closely resemblance to the truth, to tell us about the father, the mother, the nation, the family, the age, the birthplace, and the great deeds. And goes on to talk about how you derive great pleasure and delight from these tales, and then drive away the melancholy and improve the spirits. And that he also just argues, like, the man I was before, I've been greatly improved by I've become a better man because I've become a knight. That I've taken up these kind of great ideals in what Cervantes definitely kind of depicts as very much kind of a very corrupt, it's the corrupt real world. It's like, well, this is the real world. And Don Quixote is part of his insanity. Well, he really does see things that aren't there, but and he's the fool character that way. But he's also somebody who really wants to who wants to defend the weak. He wants to right the wrongs, and he's very idealistic about it. He frees galley slaves at one point, which is directly kind of going against the crown, which is sort of a dangerous thing. And indeed, you know, they come for him. They come for him later in the novel because of that, and it's like there's kind of real consequences there. So, this is a tale. This tale of Don Quixote. It's a fantastical tale, but Don Quixote, Cervantes does a very kind of mischievous thing of like saying, "Oh no, this is a history. This is a true history," and we have a chronicler who it pushes it so far in that direction that Don Quixote's in the middle of a fight, and the narrator comes up and goes, "Oh, I'm sorry, we don't have any more. We don't have any more sources. I have to go look," and then he recounts going to look, and oh look, I came upon this Arabic writer who seems to have written about Don Quixote, and he gets it translate, and the narrative picks up exactly where it cut off again, so that he can continue on. He can continue on with the story, and indeed we end the first part of this thing saying, well, oh, there's no more sources. We've got a couple of these poems and like epitaphs, but that's all we have. But hopefully, maybe I'll find more if people could remunerate me for my stuff. It's very much like this is a history, and I mean that is the sort of thing that the priest is putting forward as this is what you should devote yourself to, Don Quixote. You should read the histories of great men, the real histories of great men, not do all this frivolous fantastical stuff. But it's interesting that it's a book where you very much have the priest characters performing the function that society up until this point, kind of just at the start of the Renaissance, perform. They are the regulators of knowledge. They're the regulators of what stories are going to be believed. We're going to regulate how the Bible is read. And, as all good censors, they're very careful readers of what gets put forward so they can approve or disapprove of something. And this whole thing of popular stories that just get spread everywhere and maybe don't follow a dogma are kind of disturbing to the priests. There is a sort of certain thing here of the chivalric knight going out on this stuff. It's very much a Christian knight, and there's an idea of kind of these chivalric knights is sort of a kind of a Jesus figure of somebody who is going out to right wrongs, who is going to lead by example. As part of the power of these stories over Don Quixote is that that the knights kind of show a great example of how a human life could be lived. And while you can get that from nonfiction or the Bible, which there's a certain thing of when the canon talks about new sex, it's like this is somehow competing with the story of Jesus Christ. You're putting up other stories, and are you especially for Don Quixote, who is such a fervent kind of fundamentalist in how much he believes in the truth of the words. Absolutely, that's a part of his madness. You have to look at something like the Bible, and people who take that as literal. Everything in the Bible is literally true, and maybe they're kind of slight madness that way. And I mean, part of the Roman Catholic Church has been to kind of interpret the Bible and to kind of tone down what they want and raise up what they want for whatever reasons. But you could also say it's a way of being readers, that the big function of a church is being readers of a work of this work of stories. So there's definitely that thing of like we're having different sects coming up with this. And it made me think of Machiavelli's The Prince was written in, was it 1532? So, almost 70 years before Don Quixote. But that is where you do start getting Renaissance things of here is other examples, other philosophies of life getting put forward, who are perhaps peeling back what the the kind of accepted dogma and say, no, this is real stuff, and we're going to put forward a different kind of philosophy, a different way of maybe how we're going to regulate life, that being political theory. And also there's just sort of the thing of kind of boundaries of imagination that's getting explored in this conversation, in this book, of like, there's the boundaries of imagination being like, the church and the priests saying like, no, this is how far you can go. There's also just the thing of like with this new Renaissance and the idea of reason, of humanism, of the kind of thing of like also rejecting something like a chivalric romance because it's not based on reality. It's not thought. I mean, you get that a lot nowadays. Like people who like, I'm just not into fantasy. I need to read, if I'm going to read fiction, it's got to be realistic fiction. And, the great charge being like, oh, I didn't believe that in this book, that it didn't convince me that this was reality in a way. So there's things like that. There's also just the idea, that Cervantes, I think, is probably, how with this figure of Don Quixote as this kind of, a main character being, insane, of not having that connection with reality, of sanity and insanity. And, it's like he's walking through this world believing absolutely that these chivalric tales are true, and reacting to what seems to be a very kind of a portrait of, a Spanish society which has its corruption, which has, women getting paid for sex. It's got, it's sort of like it's life. And you have this figure coming through who is very much like, oh, no, you're a princess. Those, and kind of having all these kind of very ideas. You've imprisoned these men and sent them away to do horrible, hard labor. That's wrong. That's a wrong thing to do in this society, which is also sort of got a Christ-like thing to it, of a figure who is maybe kind of radical kindness coming in and saying, no, you're wrong. What you're doing to these people is wrong, and then being punished for it or ridiculed for it is sort of interesting thoughts in Don Quixote. So yeah, it's a silly, funny tale, but it's also kind of fun to kind of just center in and think about this character of Don Quixote, and this discussion with a priest, and it's the priest who Don Quixote says, you as the priest, you are blaspheming by denying the existence of these chivalric figures, and he talks about, and Don Quixote talks about his faith, which is sort of that's mischievous kind of thing of like, you're using a priest-like figure to say, dude, why are you believing in these made up stories? It's like, as an atheist, you have to go with, it's like, well, is the Bible a made up story that people absolutely believe in? And like, where the authority for that belief comes from. It's like, this is something that is, if it's accepted by everyone, it's not insanity. If it's only one figure who's decided that this is the way the world is, in a world that nobody else does, then it's out of it's not normal. So that, which, has gotten mined a lot with the figure of the madman, in literature, which, Don Quixote is obviously, it's one of the kind of texts for that idea. So yeah, that is my little check-in for March of the Mammoth. I'm going to start on to the second half of this book now. That's good. I'm glad I got that video out of me, so I can go on with it. How did your March of the Mammoth go? This is my combination. I guess this is my combination of March of the Mammoth with maybe Midrash, which I'm too early for. But God, by the time I get to the second half of this book, we'll probably be in November. So yeah, whatever. All right, more videos later.